Greetings, everybody. It's midterm exam season. The point of this video is to kind of get your brain moving in the right direction when it comes to what to expect and, better yet, how you might be able to prepare for this element of our class. So first things first, I want you to get a copy of your one-stop shop review document. And of course, I'm talking about the midterm exam review guide. You can get yourself a copy by going into Canvas, clicking on the modules button, and then scrolling down to exam review materials. First thing that should pop up at you after you click that drop-down button, it should be the midterm exam review guide. Go ahead and download that. Click on it, and that way you'll be seeing what I'm going to be going through here in a few minutes. Before we go any further, though, guys, what I want to do is kind of explain what you can expect and how this is going to work. First things first, in that this exam is going to be exclusively online. It's all going to be there for you to complete in Canvas, okay? No need to come in, no need to schedule yourself an appointment at the testing center. All of it's going to be done online. The exam is going to consist of two parts, and these parts are going to exist independently of one another. There is a multiple choice section, but there's also an essay section. And anything that requires you to write out a sentence, so if it's asking you to type out a sentence, your own personal opinion on some matter or another, that's an essay section, okay? Anything that involves a multiple choice question is naturally a multiple choice part of this exam. Those two parts exist apart independently of one another. Now here's the thing, you don't need to do one before you do the other. If it sounds like a good idea to you to take care of business on the essay section and then go to the multiple choice section, if you want to do it that way, that's perfectly fine. The other thing that I want to point out is that you don't need to take these things back to back. I mean, you can if you want to, but for example, if you wanted to take out the multiple choice section and then go have lunch, come back and in the afternoon take care of business on the essay section, you're perfectly able to do that. You can do it that way. The only thing that I really do care about is that both of these sections are done by the specified due date, both in Canvas as well as in the course syllabus. So pay attention to that. The last thing that I might say in the way of logistics is you really need to be ready to take that exam when you log in to take it. The thing of it is once you're in, and you can get out, you can click out of it, frankly, but Canvas doesn't know that you haven't answered 70% of the questions on any given part of that exam. It just knows that you're no longer in the exam. And so if that's the case, if you're just not ready to take it, you're going to have to get a hold of me. I'm going to have to reset it. It's going to be a whole thing. So please be ready to take it when you jump in, okay? So now that we've got the logistics out of the way, let's move on and let's break this down section by section, beginning with the multiple choice section, okay? Those terms, if you've been regular in lecture, right? If you've been focusing while you're taking in those lectures, many, maybe even most of those terms should be pretty familiar to you. Check out those first three terms on the left-hand side. Those should be relatively familiar to you at this point in the semester. We've spent some time on those, okay? Now, the thing about these terms is they are the building blocks of my exam. And if you can tell me what they are and how they fit into the context of our class, you're going to be good to go for the multiple choice section. You're going to be able to effectively navigate your way through these questions. I'll give you an example here in a second. But for right now, let me do this. I'm a really visual learner, and my guess is most of you are too. In some form or fashion, you're a visual learner as well. So if that sounds like you, what I might do is I might get myself some note cards, and then on the front of the note card, write down something, you know, if you're looking at the review guide, write down Mesoamerica. Write down Mesoamerica, and then flip the thing over, and then be very intentional, very deliberate. 5 words or less, 5 words or fewer, that remind your brain of what Mesoamerica is and why you should care about it. So for example, you could write down words like Central America. You could write down words like modern day Mexico. You could write down other words like Mayans or Aztecs, because we talked about both of those Mesoamerican civilizations in this class thus far. If you can tell me any one or any combination of those things, you are in business for the multiple choice section. So I promised an example, and here comes one. I'm not saying that all of the questions are going to be this simple, but I'm hopeful that you can see the method to my madness here. You may see a question on the exam that reads a little something like this. Mesoamerica was home to which ancient American civilization? A, the Mayans. B, the Aztecs. C, the Dallas Cowboys. Or D, options A and B. Now, obviously, if you've been paying attention, it's options A and B because Mesoamerica was home to both the Mayans and the Aztecs. Obviously, not any one of the questions are going to be this easy, let alone that hilarious on the exam. But I think that you see what I mean when it comes to how you might prepare for it and why those note cards are an effective way of maximizing your performance and minimizing the amount of time that you're going to spend on familiarizing yourself with those terms. Make sense? If not, I've got office hours and certainly you can email me, so let me know if I can help. But for right now, let's also move on to the essay section of the exam. Now, the essay section, keep in mind, everybody, essay section is anything that requires you to write out words, to type out sentences. And to that end, it consists of two different parts. Part number one is a short response section. There are 4 potential questions that you're looking at on the review guide right now, 4 of them. And when the exam opens up and you go into it, what you're going to see is that one of those 4 questions, as it's literally written right now, one of them is going to disappear. I'm not going to tell you which one, but there's a silver lining here. And that silver lining is the exam is going to only require you to answer 2 of those listed 3 questions. And of those 3 of them are going to appear of exactly how they're written on the review guide as we speak right now at this moment. So what that means for you right now, today, is choose 3 of these possible 4 questions. Throw one out. And I don't care which one of these 4 you throw out, but throw one out because that way you don't even have to worry about it. You can maximize your time and your effectiveness there. If you choose 3 and you are well prepared to answer all 3, it won't matter even if you guess wrong and the one that you did throw out ends up showing back up on the exam because in theory you've got 2 backups that you are prepared to answer. So if you prepare for 3 of those 4 that you're looking at right now, you can rest assured that you're ready to go when that exam rolls around. That's my advice. Those short answer questions are not going to change between now and when you take the exam. If you are prepared to answer at least 3, you're in business for that exam. Lastly, and probably most importantly because this is the most weighty part of the exam, I'm going to ask you where we got the concept of American political thought from. When do we begin to see American political thought beginning to kind of emanate in quote-unquote American history? Now, I'm using air quotes, and you're going to find out why here in a second. For right now, though, I want to make sure that everybody's on the same page. I don't have a preset right answer that I have to see. I've seen different students over the years. I've seen many different students approach this very, very uniquely in a very, very specific format. And so I always look forward to, I know that sounds odd, but I always look forward to grading these things because generally speaking, every single semester I see a new way of looking at this and answering this question. So feel free to be creative, but most importantly of all, I have to have you explain to me why you think what you think. Now, let's get down to the nut cutting when it comes to possible ways of answering this question. The one thing that I would really emphasize is that you want to look at this in the longue durée, meaning the big picture. You don't want to just exclusively focus on one period or another. What a lot of people have trouble with is they just get stuck there in the Revolutionary time period, the 1760s and the 1770s. There's obvious reasons as to why they do it that way, but I don't want you to do it that way, okay? I want you to look at the big picture, what historians refer to as the longue durée. We talked about numerous different indigenous societies, Native American societies, and many of them had forms of government that spread the decision-making power and ability around. They evened it out a lot more than what we were talking about in ancient Maya or ancient Azteca. It was very unique in that respect. Couple quick examples if you want a refresher. If you look at the Southwest, you had the Pueblo peoples, and the Pueblos organized their political society along the lines of moieties, an anthropological term that meant half. Half the year, the summer moiety would be in charge, and then when winter rolled around, the winter moiety would trade places with them, and they would call the shots. It was a way of spreading power a little bit more evenly, because when you live in an environment like what is now modern-day New Mexico, it's anything but predictable, and you are going to depend on other people for your day-to-day survival. And it wasn't just there at the Pueblos. If you recall, we were talking a little bit about the Iroquois League in what is now upstate New York, and this consisted of numerous different Iroquois was a language, but Iroquois nations. And it was an early form of democracy. It was a way, sort of like the modern day United Nations, of having everyone at the table so that everyone had their interests represented and they could prevent conflict. It was a way of getting along. It was an early form of democracy. So I guess my point here is that you can see that Native American voices had influenced American political thought, big picture American political thought. But I need you to think abstractly about this, because we see power-sharing mechanisms and small d democratic forms of government pop up very, very early in American history. Jamestown. You see forms of self-representative government in Jamestown almost immediately. And it's not just there. We see not only self-representative government in the other tobacco colony, Maryland, the Maryland colony, you also see the 1648 Toleration Act, Religious Tolerance Act. If you recall, Maryland was founded more or less as a safe haven for Catholics, but pretty quickly in that colony's history, they pass a law that says we're going to be tolerant of virtually any religion. And so you begin to see this separation from church and state pretty early on in American history, very early on in American history. Now, as those decades continued to roll one on top of another, you begin to see the development of political economies in places like New England. And if you think about who is settling New England, those are Puritans. And as we talked about in those lectures, Puritans very much wanted to keep everybody busy, and that meant being a farmer. And if you were going to be an effective farmer, that meant that you had to have some land. And with that land, you also had some political power as well. That land entitled you to go to your congregational church in your quote-unquote town and make decisions on how that society was going to be organized, and what future course of action, if any at all, was going to be taken. So my point here is, it doesn't really matter where in the colonies that you're talking about, you see democracy, small d democracy, popping up very, very quickly. In the Revolutionary time period, and I think that it would really be important to talk about the Revolutionary time period, you see an unmistakable influence in European Enlightenment thinkers. We talked a lot about John Locke. We talked a lot about his idea that government only gets its power from the people. It's not the other way around. It's not the king saying jump and everybody saying how high. Government is only has a legitimate power that it can exercise when the people consent to be governed. That was hugely influential to the American colonists, and virtually every one of the people that you think of as a founding father walked around with Locke's writing in his breast pocket. In any case, when Britain tries to dig itself out of the hole that it created by going to war with France and basically anybody else throughout that time period, it got itself big time into debt. The Prime Minister, George Grenville, begins to tax the colonists. And because the colonists understand that they don't have any representation over there in London's Parliament, then basically that law is not legitimate. Currency Act, Sugar Act, Stamp Act, none of those laws are legitimate as far as people like John Adams is concerned, because Britain hasn't given us, the American colonists, any opportunity at all to consent to that law. And so we basically begin to protest. it starts out as like a Stamp Act Congress, which leads to a boycott. I'm skipping some very critical, events and developments here, but it'll end with the Boston Tea Party. The fact that Bostonians were so appalled by the 1771 Tea Act, that they rebelled by dumping official British government property into the Boston Harbor. We talked a lot about the ultimate Declaration of Independence, and I described that to you in the lectures as this very critical moment, not just in American history, but really in world history, because it marks the end of an era, the end of the medieval time period. We had kings and queens and popes that ruled over primarily Europe, but really everywhere, and they told people how to live and what they had to do and things of that variety. And in 1776, after Thomas Jefferson put pen to paper and signed the Declaration of Independence, right, along with the other framers, you see the end of the medieval time period, the beginning of what you might think of as the rule of the people, the small d, democratic era, okay? And so this is a very important concept when it comes to American political thought, because there's all kinds of different things that's baked into the Declaration of Independence. Everything from the idea of, self-representative government to, what kinds of governments are legitimate and the role that people ought to be playing in those governments. There's all kinds of different, very uniquely American concepts of political thought that are there in the Declaration of Independence. If you really are ambitious and you really want to impress the reader, what you might consider doing is talking about the post-revolutionary period. I told you at the time, everybody was very much on the same page when it comes to what they did not like about the way that Britain was ruling over us, but there's a lot of diversity of thought when it comes to what kind of government we ought to have when we're in charge. We found out that the Articles of Confederation sounded like a great idea, that your statesmen, that the state government would have a lot more power and authority. But as it turns out, there was a reason why Britain was doing what it was doing. There was a reason why it was taxing us, and we found out what those reasons were pretty quickly on after we won our independence. And we're going to replace the Articles of Confederation with the Constitution. We're going to add on those first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights, to the Constitution, which I know are going to guarantee our civil rights and our civil liberties. Laws that Congress will not add. Congress will not pass. So I hope that I've generated at least a little bit of food for thought. I'm also hopeful that you can see that there's many different ways that you can go about answering this question. You certainly don't have to stick to one thing or another. I need you to pull in evidence that really makes sense to you, okay? What I might do if I were you, and I know we need to wrap this up, but what I might do if I were you is, again, employ that 5-paragraph essay approach to this paper, okay? That's a good strategy. You'll need an intro, you'll need a conclusion. There's 2 of your 5 paragraphs right there. Choose 3 different time periods, or at the very least 3 different concepts to make your body paragraph. Paragraph 1 could be the pre-American era, the pre-revolutionary period. That can range from everything from indigenous forms of democracy to early forms of democratic rule in the colonies. You can pick the revolutionary period and the concept of no taxation without representation. And you can wrap things up in paragraph 3 with talking about the immediate post-revolutionary war period, a juxtaposition between the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution, as we just talked about a second ago. So once again, I'm hopeful that this is helpful. You are by no stretch of the imagination obliged to do it that way. You can do it whatever way makes sense for you. Just a final word of advice. It's really, really important for you to tell me why you think what you think. Not necessarily guess what's on my mind, okay? Tell me why you think what you think, and justify it by bringing in concrete evidence, concrete examples, and that's going to go a long, long way in this assignment. So, once again, hope that this has been helpful. If you have specific questions, you know how to get a hold of me. See you later, everyone, and best of luck.